Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Jeremy, one of the guys here at Flyin Miata, and today we have a Facebook Live presentation where we are going to talk about one of our long-standing shop cars, which we call Pokey. And this is a 1995 Merlot M Edition. The Flyin Miata actually purchased this car new, and we've had it since 1994 or 5 when they came out. And it has been a development car for us this entire time. And it has seen so many different things. You know, a large chunk of the product offerings that we have for, you know, the NAs and especially the NA8 cars, you know, we developed on this car. So we thought we'd give you a little rundown today. At this point in time, the car is kind of historical because it's still loaded with a lot of the really high-end performance and engine and drivetrain stuff that, you know, that we used to sell in years past. But it's still a really awesome car. It's the highest horsepower 4-cylinder that, you know, we've had as a shop car here. We've built higher horsepower 4-cylinders for customers, but this is, you know, the biggest one that we did here in the shop. And then also, you know, I'm going to talk about the car today because I've put a tremendous amount of miles on this car. I've driven it on road trips and lots of things. So let's talk about it. You know, on the outside, 95 Merlot, and it's, you know, and we've kept it always indoors and it's in pretty good condition. We never really did a lot to the exterior. You know, it's got a lot of historical things on it. You know, it's got a sport hard dog roll bar that's been on here for, you know, longer than I have. On the interior, you know, we did a shift knob and a steering wheel. Really, not a whole lot on the interior. We always wanted to keep this car, you know, fairly sedate looking and keep it focused on the kind of the performance aspects. We have some super vintage white gauge faces in here that we used to sell way back in the day. When I first started working here in 2004, 5, this car had a stock 1.8 engine in it still, and it had what we were selling at the time, which was our Ubercharger setup. And what that setup was, it was a supercharger kit that was manufactured with a 1.2 liter Whipple supercharger, which was very different than a lot of the Eaton and other superchargers that we've seen over the years. And it was a lot of fun with the supercharger on it. Unfortunately, it also had a 2.5-inch turbo exhaust. So when I first showed up, it sounded like a Cessna. Because the turbo exhaust on a supercharged car really is not a great idea if you like to do things like drive without earplugs or listen to the radio. And I actually road tripped it like that, and that was a fun road trip. So we did that for a while, and then, you know, the supercharger came off, high compression engine went in, came out, you know, turbo engine went in, and then one day we had a customer who, at the time, we had built a 2-liter stroker engine for his car, and his car originally had the 2-liter stroker with an Ubercharger, and then he took it off and we put a turbo kit on it with the 2-liter stroker, and then he showed up one day and said, hey, I want you to put one of those new LS3s in my car. And he was one of the first customers that we did an LS3 conversion on his car, and we took back the stroker engine. So we went through it, you know, refreshed the rings and the bearings and stuff, and dropped it in here. And that would have been maybe around 2010, I would say, somewhere in there. So since then, this car has been loaded with a VVT 2-liter stroker. And from that, we've done lots and lots of turbo testing over the years. And basically, this car ended up with all the bells and whistles. You know, it it still kind of has on it, our Hydronemesis ECU that we used to sell, the 2.7. And we would use this to, you know, when we would have to test other units and stuff. So we wanted this car to have all the things on it so that we could test whatever we needed to test with other ECUs. So it has things like, obviously, the variable valve timing from the VVT engine, obviously. It has a product we used to sell called the Big Spark Kit. And this Big Spark Kit was for the high horsepower engines where we would run a quad of LS3 coil packs in full sequential, just because they have tremendous spark energy, you know, still, you know, a lot more energy than like the Toyota coil on plugs. And this also has an NB alternator on it because we needed to be able to test alternator control with the ECU. Let's see what else. It has has a big flex fuel system on it. So for a long time, we ran this car purely on E85, but it is still loaded with a flex fuel system, so it can transition seamlessly between gasoline and E85. We ended up doing the development for our old FM2R turbo system on it, which is where we used an externally wastegated GT3071R, which was our favorite turbo for the larger horsepower, and it really helped to have the stroker engine when we did this turbo. And the stroker engine it's a 1995 cc engine. So it's, the stock bore is 83 millimeters. And with the turbo setup, we went out to 84.5 millimeters on the bore. And then the stroke, we lengthened the rod by 6 millimeters. And so by doing that, at the time, back in those days, we actually bisected a block with a bandsaw, took some measurements and figured out, how far are we comfortable going as far as the overbore, et cetera, and then, worked with other people to develop the stroke. And then we had a custom Moldex crankshaft made along with the rods and the pistons, and that was the stroker kit that we sold for a lot of years. That turned it from an 1840 cc into a 1995, and so we call it a 2-liter. And that extra displacement does help to spool the turbo faster, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and when the years we were running this on E85, at one point we were also doing development on this car with the Quaife 5-speed gear set, which we haven't sold those for a long time, but that's where the development came. And when we had that Quaife 5-speed gear set in here, that's also when we set the high water mark for, at the time, the turbo cars here at the shop, and we did, I think it was about 425 wheel or so on E85. Since then, we've ended up putting a 6-speed back in this car and a 390, and running this thing. It's been about 15 psi on pump gas, and it's lived for many years running this car with a 6-speed on the E85 or on the pump gas, about 15 psi, and that produces around 325 wheel, which it's a fantastic sweet spot. That's one of my 2 favorite sweet spots for horsepower in the Miata. I really like that 180 to 200 wheel range for kind of the autocross canyon carving fun, because it's really balanced chassis with the horsepower. And then I like that 325, 350 horsepower range for the bigger horsepower setups. It's kind of a different animal, but those are kind of the 2 sweet spots in my opinion for the horsepower. So we just recently put in our new cross-flow radiator here, which you can see. This funny story. This still had a really old FM aluminum radiator from probably like the late 90s in the car, and it had lived all this time. But we said, what, we've got these new cross-flows, and the old ones, the fins are getting a little beat up and stuff, so let's go ahead and put one in. Yeah. Gosh, we've done intake manifold testing. At this point, it has a gutted VICS manifold on it. But, this is one of the cars when we were doing the manifold testing with, the flat top versus the VTCS versus the VICS. So moral of the story, over the years, we've done a tremendous amount of product testing on this car. And it's been a really solid car. I daily drove it for years. So, it's probably got the most hydro tuning time of any car on the planet because, it was effectively my commuter car for a bunch of years. And it's just is a phenomenal car. If you like the idea of having that little bit of extra displacement and quite a bit of extra power, it's really hard to beat. It does have manual steering, which is, that is one thing that some people either love or hate. It never really bothered me because I wasn't autocrossing with it. If I was autocrossing with it, I'd probably want power steering, but for a street car, didn't really bother me that much anyway. So let's go ahead and put the car up in the air and take a look underneath, because there's a few things in there, so it's going to be noisy for a second. So let's go eye level real quick. This car has our Wilwood front big brake kit on it. We sell big brake kits that have the front with the Wilwood calipers, rear with the sport and the stock calipers, or rear with Wilwoods and as well. So this one's got the Wilwoods in the front. And then on this one, we did do the, the kind of the original style big brake kit where we did the 11-inch rotors in the rear, but just kept the stock rear calipers so that the e-brake was functional. So you can see that. And it's very comfortable street setup. We've tracked this car here at our local track quite a bit. We've never really taken this car on big tracks, just because we always have other fun things when we go out to the big tracks. But it has spent quite a bit of time on our local track here, which is kind of a smallish course. All right, now let's take a peek at the underneath. So starting in the front, from the cooling perspective, we always do feel it's really important to retain the factory under tray. And a lot of those get ripped off or damaged, and so we do sell quite a few of those new that we keep in stock. But you want to keep all that the airflow. Really, the number one key thing for cooling of the cars is to maximize your airflow over the heat exchangers. And one of the great ways to do that is by not letting the air out the bottom. This particular car has, you can see, bottoms of cars are always nice and dirty, but you can see we've got V-Maxx Classics on here, and these have been a great shock for this car. It's got polyurethane in the A-arm bushings. This particular car also has our, if you can see them, oh, here's a nice shot back here. It's got our poly engine mounts as well. And then in the back, it also has our poly diff mounts. So we've got poly on all the places in this particular car. So it's nice and tight. You can see back here with the big fuel system how we set up the AEM fuel pressure regulator back here. And we've got the fuel pressure regulator with the gauge, and then the high flow fuel filter over here. And then over here, we've got the flex fuel sensor. So with these systems, how we set it up, we would always, mount the big fuel stuff back here. And in this particular car, it is manifold referenced on the regulator. For the normal horsepower stuff, we never really bothered, but with the big horsepower stuff, when we start getting over, 15, 18, 20 PSI, we like to regulate it. It does change your fuel mapping a little bit, but it's a solvable problem. So we've got our 3-inch exhaust on this. It's actually got a brand new cat in it. So these big horsepower setups are a little hard on cats. So when we went through this one, we decided to just go ahead and put a brand new cat in it to freshen everything up. And then you can see this downpipe that we used to use with the FM2R systems, where we had the external wastegate married back into the downpipe so that it keeps it relatively quiet still compared to a divorce setup. You can see the ribbed case 6-speed transmission. And then, of course, the butterfly brace, which the old style butterfly brace. This has been a development car for a lot of years, so it's always been very reliable, and it's always been extremely fast. And all the guys here really enjoy driving it. So that is our 95 FM2R stroker car. Let's see, is there any questions coming in? Nothing coming in? All right. Well, if you have any questions about the car, note that you may see this car go up on Bring a Trailer shortly in the future. So something you might want to keep an eye out for. And you can reach out to our customer support team at support@flyinmiata.com if you have any other questions. And once again, to all our friends out there, thank you very much. And hope you all had a great holiday. And we will see you next time. Take care.